Hello and welcome to Security Scan. I am Vishal Dahiya, and this week we're going to talk about Indo-Pacific and the maritime alliances in this particular region and the strategic significance of all these alliances as well. And for more on this, we're joined by a distinguished panel of experts. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with Commander Abhijeet Singh, head of the Maritime Policy Initiative at ORF. We're also joined by Retired Commodore Anil Singh. He is the Vice President of Indian Maritime Foundation. And we also have Manu Pubby with us, Senior Editor, Economic Times, and somebody who keeps a tab on all the developments as far as strategic and defense aspects are concerned. Let me begin with you, Commander Abhijit, and let's try and understand the very concept of Indo-Pacific before we talk about the maritime alliances or the maritime domain awareness.
Right. So, Vishal, the Indo-Pacific has now entered the geopolitical lexicon as a valid strategic construct. And it's not just India, but a number of other countries, the US, Japan, Australia, ASEAN, that have some degree of acceptance of the construct of the Indo-Pacific, which essentially combines two strategic theaters, the Indian Ocean and the Pacific, and sees them as one singular entity. There have hitherto been 2 or 3 versions of the Indo-Pacific. We've all heard about the US's version, which is called the Free and Open Indo-Pacific, which to an Indian analyst is a more aggressive version of this construct. It's more about confronting the US's strategic rivals, which is Australia, which is Russia and China. The Indian version is more accepting of all stakeholders and a lot more conciliatory, or at least up until the point the Galwan incident happened. We sort of gave the impression as if we were willing to accept all stakeholders. And then, of course, there was the ASEAN version, which was, again, also till earlier this year, more accepting of China's presence, working alongside China. But I think what's happened in the recent few weeks and months is that both India as well as ASEAN have shifted a bit right towards the American model of the Indo-Pacific, in which we are willing to join ranks with each other, join forces to present a united front to China. And it is in that context that the Indo-Pacific now has come back into the discussion. So these alliances that we are all actually talking about, alliance, by the way, is a term that India is not very comfortable with. But to my mind, what we are seeing emerge is some kind of a Quad plus arrangement in which the Quad countries, which is India, US, Japan and Australia, are strengthening their ties, but we are also looking at including other countries like France, there's countries also on the Pacific side that we are more comfortable working with, Indonesia, Singapore, other ASEAN countries. Again, going into the future, we don't quite know whether the Indo-Pacific as a great alliance will materialize or not, but definitely there are signs that we are willing to work with each other much more, and this all seems to be much more centered on combating the China challenge in the Pacific as also the Indian Ocean. As you know, after the Galwan incident, there have been some doubts expressed about what is China's strategy going to be in the Indian Ocean. So I think it is just as well that we are thinking of sort of combining forces with our allies and friends to be able to present a united front to China.
Okay. We'll come to the China part as well in a bit, because that obviously is a very, very important, significant factor here when we talk about Indo-Pacific. But let me first bring in Commodore Anil Singh. Commodore Singh, in 2018 at, a Shangri-La dialogue, Prime Minister Narendra Modi had then said about Indo-Pacific that India considers this as a geographical concept and not as a sort of a strategy or a club of limited members. So from there onwards to today as well, and the kind of movement we see in terms of these cooperation between various nations and the way India is also entering into these maritime alliances or cooperation agreements with some of these nations. How would you look at the entire situation in Indo-Pacific and the overall concept of Indo-Pacific as such?
I think as far as the Indo-Pacific is concerned, a lot of water has flown under the bridge since 2018. I think when the Prime Minister delivered his keynote address at the Shangri-La Dialogue in 2018, he did describe it as a concept, and he also very categorically defined the limits of the Indo-Pacific. It wasn't only about the Pacific, it was about the complete Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. He said, right from the shores of Africa to the shores of America. So I think from that concept in the last 2 years, as Abhijit brought out, things have changed. And for India particularly so, in the context of the recent standoff with China across the LAC. If you would recollect, also at the Raisina Dialogue in 2018, all the four chiefs of the four navies of the Quad were on a panel. And a couple of months after that happened, the Americans, PACOM, actually made a statement that I think the Quad is a non-starter. And that was mainly because India was very reticent about clearly stating that this has got anything to do with China. India's stand was always that we want this to be inclusive. It's for everybody in the region, a rules-based international order. We won't go with everybody. We are not against anybody. We are not taking a stand against China. But that, I think, in the last 6 months has changed. And we have seen a very clear and distinct shift in the Indian stance towards the Indo-Pacific region, towards the maritime democracies of the region. We've seen a shift from them. Who would have thought 1 year ago that Australia would be so vehemently opposed to China in less than 1 year? They've totally changed the stance 180 degrees. Japan has become more aggressive. Japan was very benign all this while. America always looked at it that way. And now a very significant aspect, I think, is that the Europeans have understood the importance of the Indo-Pacific. While the French do consider themselves an Indian Ocean power because they have territories here, and so their participation in the activities here is well par for the course, even though they weren't a very big presence here earlier. But the Brits have now said that they will position aircraft carrier in the Indian Ocean and Indo-Pacific. And just last week, the Germans have enunciated an Indo-Pacific strategy. And the German defense foreign minister actually made a statement that this is where the shape of the international order tomorrow will be decided. So we have to be a part of it. So I think this acknowledgement of this shift, that the global balance of power, the global order is going to be shaped by this region, is very much now a recognized aspect by all countries of the world. They've also now, without many of them naming it, also clearly indicated that who they're worried about over here. Again, the German foreign minister said that it is not the rule of the strong. We want to go for a rules-based international order. So all this indicates that the whole aspect of the approach to the Indo-Pacific is changing. However, and I would just like to add these two things. Firstly, in terms of alliances, I think alliance is a very sort of defined, structured term. So even the foreign minister, not so long ago, in an interview to one of the newspapers, made it very clear that India will never be part of an alliance. He made a very categorical statement. So I think we should probably not use alliance. We should probably use alignments. There are certain alignments that are happening. But India, I doubt if India politically is still mature enough. I won't say mature enough, but whether India really wants to go down that path of an alliance, because it will have political implications.
Okay.
And I think the second aspect, and this is what I always emphasized as far as the Indo-Pacific is concerned, that India has to focus a lot more on the of the Indo-Pacific. There are enough Pacific powers in Indo-Pacific. There are very few Indian Ocean powers who are considered a part of the Indo-Pacific. So I think we need to really apply our minds to how we are going to secure the of the Indo-Pacific.
Okay, that's indeed is a very, very important point out there. Looking at the Indo part specifically in Indo-Pacific, but as both of you pointed out, it's about alignments, and perhaps the alignments only will translate into alliances if both sides would want that to happen in the future course of action. Let me bring in Manu here. Manu, your views on the significance of Indo-Pacific region here, as both the gentlemen are pointing out. Although this concept, was being talked about almost a decade ago, but it has become, or rather, acquired the center stage of the dialogue process in this particular region and elsewhere as well.
Absolutely, and I agree with both the panelists on the importance of it and the construct of it. See, the Indo-Pacific concept and I would not use alliances. I would use partnerships. Partnerships that are emerging in the Indo-Pacific right now. They are emerging between a very interesting set of nations. One is a set of nations, democratically elected countries, countries which believe in the freedom of navigation in international law, in an orders-based system of the world. They all have common value systems on human rights, on freedom of expression, and all of that. And a counter to that is what we are seeing, expansionist powers in the same region, namely China, which has tried to alter the very nature of and geography of the South China Sea itself by creating new military bases. So it's a very interesting variation you're seeing between the two sets of countries which are aligning together or which are partnering up. See, India, I think, has had a very interesting and it has been a bit slow. A lot of people have been, not very happy with that. But I think it's a good pace that we have done. We have forced increase our partnerships, which is our bilateral relationship in the region. So we have aligned up or partnered up with Japan. Our bilateral relationship with Japan is at an all-time high. We have really increased our partnership with Australia in the past 2-3 years to a level now where we're having very complex and further more complex exercises. Our partnerships with smaller nations in this region, be it Vietnam, be it the Philippines, be it Indonesia, I think we are all emphasizing a lot on on increasing relations there. And even extra-regional powers which have interests in this region, for example, France and the US, India is doing something with each one of them. And the reason is, in the past few years, India has come to realize that to counter or to contain this expanding territorial ambitious neighbor of ours, we need to create partnerships. We can't do this alone. They are all like-minded nations which have to come together to do it. See, India does not believe in overseas military posts because we don't have an expansionist nature. But China, for example, has set up a military post in Djibouti. There are plans to maybe set them up in other parts of around us in Pakistan, Iran, possibly Sri Lanka. So I think what we have done is, instead of becoming a China which has territorial and global ambitions, we are looking at a partnership model. We will partner with both a stronger nation and a weaker nation to work together on a common goal. And I think this is the partnership which will see us through in the next few decades. And I hope it doesn't need to take a military turn. But I think we have to be prepared for any eventuality on that front.
Okay. Let me go back to Abhijit here. Abhijit, China factor is a really important aspect here, and all of you have in your initial responses spoken about how the entire policy or the strategy of most of the countries in this particular region are driven by the way China acts or reacts out there. Now, one important aspect and one very important theory which everybody, all the nations are talking about is the rule-based order. How would you see the situation, from here onwards vis-a-vis the way China is behaving specifically in these particular regions?
It's interesting that you mentioned China in this context. What I have to say is that China is in many ways an enabling trigger or an enabling factor in the Indo-Pacific region, in that it creates the essential rationale for all the countries to work together, but it is also in many ways a limiting factor. And the reason I say this is that the Indo-Pacific, if you look at it from an Indian perspective, is about, of course, the maritime commons. But India's interests, as Commodore AJ very rightly said, are really in the Indian Ocean. And what we would like to do, that if at all there is some vision of the rules-based order that needs to be implemented, we would be more interested in doing that in the Indian Ocean. However, what we see is that as far as the Pacific countries are concerned, and this includes the US, the Indo-Pacific is essentially a concept that focuses on the challenges in the Western Pacific or in the South China Sea, which essentially means that when they talk about the rules-based order, what they mean is that all the other countries should somehow assist in setting up that rules-based order in the Pacific, in the Western Pacific, and perhaps also in the East China Sea. The Indian Ocean for many of these countries is really an adjunct. It's an add-on. It's not the real theater of importance.
Okay.
So in that sense, there is a contradiction. But second, I would point out that even in our own approach to the Indo-Pacific, there are certain dilemmas or contradictions, which is that our Indo-Pacific strategy, we have recognized, recognizes ASEAN centrality to the Indo-Pacific, which is that we ourselves are saying that there should be buy-in from ASEAN into the concept. And ASEAN has up until now been actually quite a reluctant acceptor of the idea of the Indo-Pacific. It's only now that they have some time back that they came up with this whole Indo-Pacific vision, which was, by the way, quite soft on China. It actually didn't go the 9 yards in calling out the China challenge in the same way as the US has done or Australia has done, and for that matter now India is doing. Okay. But again, the problem is that all of our diplomacy with ASEAN in the Indo-Pacific region, it really revolves around non-traditional security challenges. It's around maritime security as in non-traditional maritime security. It's about benign challenges. It's about, marine conservation. It's about, issues like pollution, climate change, tourism. The China factor does not quite come in the way that it should. So I would say that this is not as straightforward as some of us would like to think it is. Mm-hmm. While there is a greater desire to work with each other, a lot of countries in the Pacific region are still not willing to upfront recognize the China challenge. And that, I suspect, is because China is a critical actor in the economics of that region. We do know that, when it comes to supply chains, a lot of these supply chains are emanating from China. They sort of arise from China. China is important as far as the economics of that region is concerned, but also infrastructure development. For instance, the ASEAN has got the infrastructure. They've got a master plan for infrastructure, which is being underwritten by China. Okay. IT, when it comes to cyber IT, the Chinese are invested in that region. So it's going to be hard for us to get ASEAN to buy into this concept. Secondly, where do we ourselves stand on the issue of the Indo-Pacific? Are we willing to accept that this is about Pacific challenges and not so much about Indian Ocean challenges? And lastly, I'd like to point out, we have to sort of understand that rules-based order is good, but this is essentially an American formulation. It is basically a Western formulation. As far as we are concerned, when we signed up to the Indo-Pacific, when we signed up to the Quad, it was meant to be inclusive, but we also wanted to build some capacity to be able to counter China in the Indian Ocean. Mm-hmm. And I think at the moment, in the way things are progressing ahead, we are not being able to build that capacity for ourselves to present that counter to China in the Indian Ocean. So I think it would behoove us to also recognize the constraints in the Indo-Pacific concept and not just see it as some enabling construct which is going to, contain the China challenge for all of us.
Okay, wonderful. Commodore Singh, your views on the China factor there, and also how does India benefit from these partnerships or alliances which we are entering into, or agreements, specific ones with countries like Japan, Australia, France as well? How would that serve our interests?
Firstly, I would agree with Abhijit when he says that, we still need to build a lot of capacity in the Indian Ocean to be able to counter the China challenge. China may be down at the moment, but it's not out. The ASEAN aspect, well, you've got to appreciate that these 10 ASEAN countries ultimately have to live in accommodation with China in their region. China will be the single biggest power in the region. They cannot afford to antagonize China. So they've got to live in accommodation with it. So far, whether it was the US or it was Japan or it was Australia or India for that matter, none of them had unequivocally sort of taken on China. So it left these 10 countries in a very difficult situation. Which way to swing, which way to go. So they were sitting more or less on the fence. And so they were accepting Chinese support. They were part of the BRI. They are part of the BRI. They are getting support from China. They're looking at their own bilateral and multilateral arrangements with China, and that's not going to change. Yes, there has been a pushback against China, which has probably taken China also by surprise. Perhaps that is more to do with the sort of fallout of Wuhan and everything else that's happened, where China hasn't quite covered itself with glory as a nation. But as far as India is concerned, I think it's important for India because India, the Asia Pacific, what we used to know as the Asia Pacific, that's east of Malacca, is an important trading partner for India. Mm-hmm. I think about 40% of our trade is with that part of the world. So we cannot neglect that part of the world at all. And as far as partnerships with Japan, strategic partnerships with Japan are concerned, Australia is concerned, or even the US is concerned, France is concerned, these countries have to support us in building capacity in the Indian Ocean. For example, a few years ago, we were hearing of the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, a Japan-India initiative to counter the BRI in a more inclusive manner. It hasn't really taken off as it should, but it was definitely a concept that was being spoken about. Similarly, after many years of dilly-dallying on Chabahar, it was finally the Japanese said, okay, we said Japanese will support us in developing this. So I think while militarily we may not look at Japan or Australia coming to our aid, certainly from building capacity, these are big economies, they're rich countries. they can certainly help us build capacity in the Indian Ocean. And I think that's why it's very important that we establish partnerships and alignments with them, not against a common enemy, but against a concept that we want to grow in the Indian Ocean, that India is the premier Indian Ocean power, so it should have the capacity to be able to handle any crisis and be able to develop this region in an inclusive manner. All this saga that we hear about, bringing all this into play. So these countries will help us do that. We expect Japan, Australia may not militarily be in the Indian Ocean, but certainly economically, from a capacity building perspective, they can partner with us in Indian Ocean. So that's how I see India's sort of relationship with this part of the world.
Okay. So capacity building is one of the key takeaways as far as India's strategic partnership with some of these nations are concerned in the Indo-Pacific region. Manu, concluding comments from you on both these aspects, the China factor and what is in it for India?
Yeah, see, I would like to address the second part first on what is it for India. See, for India, what is most important right now is that you need, from the security point of view, eyes on the oceans. You need to know what's happening. So maritime domain awareness is most essential to figure out where the Chinese are coming in from, what actions will they take. And in that, these partnerships are very helpful. So we have signed, this very big enabling act with Australia, with Japan, with the US and with France, which is the Military Logistics Sharing Pact. So basically, our ships and our aircraft can go to any of these countries or their bases abroad and get refueled. So that basically gives us, endless endurance in the Indo-Pacific area. So it just gives us more leg room to operate. Secondly, we have done intelligence sharing agreements with all these countries. So technically speaking, and plus we have this COMCASA agreement with the US, which shares real-time intelligence on assets and what is happening. So to illustrate an example to you, these alliances, how they're helping out. For example, a Chinese submarine which puts out from, say, its base in China, travels close to Australia and comes into the Indian Ocean region. We can technically get a feed of it almost real time from assets tracking it through and through right to the Indian Ocean region. Now, this is a great capacity. You might not want to do anything with it, but it gives you the ability to understand what is happening around you. With Japan, what we are already getting is technology. Japan has been dealing with the belligerent China on the maritime front for years. They're helping us right now on planning what to do with the Andaman Islands, how to set up underground submarine detectors. So these are all countries who have dealt with China over the years. So they will help us with technology, with expertise, and with real-time intelligence. I think that's going to be really important. And on the first thing on China, we have to prepare for a China which is getting more aggressive. You're right. I agree that right now the conflict areas in the South China Sea, but we are next. All indications are that the Chinese are going to come into the Indian Ocean more aggressively in the coming years. They're building a fleet of 4 to 5 aircraft carriers. We are seeing them operating nuclear submarines in the Indian Ocean region already for no good reason. I think we have to prepare in the coming decades for them coming in. And this capacity building from our partners in the Indo-Pacific. And, I really hope that the Indian Navy also gets more resources to plan out its force levels. We need to have more aircraft carriers. We need more submarines. We need more, ships out there and eyes in the sea. And I think we have to prepare for this. And I think this partnership model is the cornerstone to it. But we have to put up our own end onto it, which requires us to shore up the Navy. And I hope that happens in the coming years.
Okay. So there it is. Thank you so much, Manu. As Manu and our two other guests, Commodore Anil Singh and Commander Abhijit also pointed out, this is about the capacity building and having maritime domain awareness about, the alliances or strategic partnership with nations in Indo-Pacific as far as takeaways for India are concerned. And China does remain a factor, but not the only factor behind these partnerships which nations are entering into, including India with each other. Thank you so much, all the guests. And we'll come back again next week with a different topic. Till then, you keep watching Rajya Sabha Television. Thank you.